Hi and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman and today we are at week number 42 of our 52-week series of Scrappy blocks. The block that I've created today I'm calling a 4-patch square dance. A really simple block. It's using 2.5-inch squares and 3-inch squares for the half square triangles. I try to keep all of these blocks as simple as possible, which will hopefully inspire you to use up your scrap stash and actually make some beautiful scrappy quilts. Before I show you how to put this block together, just a couple of things I wanted to make you aware of. There is a PDF in the description box below. Make sure that you grab that. You can download it, save it, print it, whatever you choose to do. And I always like to give some kind of a sample quilt using the Scrappy block for the week. And this is the sample quilt and you'll see it here. It's just a beautiful one and it makes a beautiful design. You can see the secondary designs with the lights and the darks in that block. I'm going to show you how that's done. And before we get started, I do want to remind you that I do have a tutorial out on my site which teaches you everything you need to know about how to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. I've got a corresponding book. This is my techniques book. This is my patterns book. Between these two books, you not only get the complete techniques that you need to get your scrap stash ready to go, but you get 5 patterns in this one, 12 patterns in this one. So check that out. I've got a link to my website. Also, I have the video tutorial on this techniques book. I'll have that linked below. And in March on National Quilting Day, I did a Scrap Up Your Stash video tutorial as well. I'll have that one linked below. You might enjoy kind of following along with me as I scrapped up my stash, and you can do the same with your scrap stash. Now let's see what we need for this block for this week. So here is the block. You can kind of see the fun little ring that's created. I'm calling that the 4-patch square dance. It's basically 4-patch units throughout the entire block. And each 4-patch unit has one half square triangle within that unit, except for the 4-patch in the middle. The 4-patch in the middle is simply that, a 4-patch. So let's see how this is done. What you're going to want to pull, first of all, for your half square triangles, you're going to want to pull 4 3-inch lights. You're going to want to pull 2 3-inch darks and 2 3-inch mediums. So you'll need that. You're also going to want to pull 2.5-inch squares, and I have pulled a total of, let me see, was it 8 or 10? 8 of the 2.5-inch squares that are light, 10 of the 2.5-inch squares that are medium, and 10 of the 2.5-inch squares that are dark. That's what you're going to need for your block, and it is a great block to use up your 2.5-inch squares or your charms. There's so many ways. You can take 5-inch charms and cut them to 2.5-inch size squares. There's so many ways that you can make this block. So just take a look at what you have in your scrap stash and then make do with what you've got. And what I'm using here are a bunch of the 2.5-inch squares and the 3-inch squares. So now let's get started on how I put that together. So what you'll want to start with is to make your half square triangle units. And they're going to be a total of 8 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 half square triangles in the block. And what I've done here is I laid my 2 dark, my 2 light, 3-inch, my 2 dark, my 2 medium 3-inch squares here on this mat. Now I'm taking the 4 3-inch lights and I am laying them right sides together on each and every one of these blocks. And you have seen me do this over and over again because many of my 52-week series of blocks do include half square triangles. So you've seen this technique done, but I draw a line from corner to corner. I'll do it on all 4 blocks. I do this in assembly line. I pair them up in assembly line fashion. I draw the lines in assembly line fashion. Then I'm going to grab them all and sew down one side of that line a 1/4 inch, a scant 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to come back on the other side and sew a scant 1/4 inch, and I'm going to do that in assembly line fashion for all of the squares at the same time. Then I'm going to cut them apart and press them open and square them up. They have to all be squared up to 2.5 inches once they're finished. So let me go ahead. I'm going to finish drawing the lines. I am going to sew on each side, and then I'll bring it back to the tabletop here and show you how I separate them. So I have finished sewing these together. Got the 2 mediums and the 2 darks with the 4 lights. and I'm going to cut them apart. And you've seen me do this before as well. I like to cut from stitching line to stitching line, and this just cuts off or gets rid of some of that excess dog ears on each end of that half square triangle. So from cutting line or stitching line to stitching line, I cut across there, and then you are simply going to cut on the line, and then you'll have 2 half square triangle units for each pair. And what we're going to next do is get them squared up. I use a perfectly slotted trimming up ruler, a square up ruler, which is something that I love to use. You can use any square up ruler that you might have. I'll show you what I use, and then I'm going to show you some other options as well. So the trimmer that I love to use, it's actually called the Clearly Perfect Slotted Trimmer. I've shown this to you before. I really do like that. This is trimmer A, which is the 1/2 inch increments, and then trimmer B is even increments. And since we are squaring up our half square triangles to 2.5 inches, I'm going to use the A, trimmer A. And I'll simply line up the stitching line here with the stitching line on the half square triangle. So here we go, 2.5 inch stitching line right there, lined up with the 2.5 inch, with the stitching line on the half square triangle. And then I'm simply going to trim around on each side here, remove that excess. Whoops, I messed up there. There we go. And then what's really nice about the slotted trimmer is that you also have these little slots right here, and then one right here, which allow you to trim off the points. So the points are trimmed off, and now I can open it, press it to the dark, or if you prefer, you can certainly press your half square triangles open. You just open up the seam allowances. I'm trying to get my fingers in there to separate them. You could certainly do that. I would recommend if you do open your seam allowances and press them, that they would do certainly lay flatter that way, but you might want to consider making sure that your stitching width, or length I should say, is a little bit smaller, maybe a 2 or a 2.0 when you're stitching the seam allowances for half square triangles that you intend to press open. That way it'll prevent any possible pulling out of the stitches as it's being quilted. So that's just something to think about. But more and more quilters are tending to go with opening their seam allowances, which is great. So you can either nest them pressing to the dark or open them up, whichever you prefer. And the other option you can use if you don't have something like this, there are many square up rulers on the market. I'm only showing you 2 here today, but here is another option. If you're going to use a square ruler that has a 45-degree diagonal line on it, that's important to do this, then you would need to press your half square triangle units open first. And then once they're pressed open, and I've just finger pressed it right now, but once they're pressed open, then you would line up the half square triangle with that diagonal line on the seam line, and then you would look at the 2.5 inch line, and I can see here that I definitely need to make some trimmings here. All right, so it is lined up on the 45-degree angle. There's the 2.5 inch line, there's the 2.5 inch line. So I need to remove this outer edge of excess fabric around the square. There we go. So that one is done. Got a little bit of that one that has to go. So that's how you can, and you can use any size. Maybe you have a 2.5 inch Omni Grid or any sort of a ruler like this. 4.5, 6.5, 9.5, 12.5, it doesn't really matter. It certainly is easier to maneuver if they're smaller when you're dealing with smaller half square triangles. But anything like this, there are many other square up rulers on the market. Just find one that you like, that works well for you, and use that. On the table in front of me here, you've seen that I've laid out the block. There are 6 squares across, 6 squares down to create the block. And I've simply followed the design here that's in the PDF, so make sure that you follow that accurately, making sure that you're putting the mediums and the darks. What I've done is I've got my real dark colors on each side here. Up in the, I guess for you that would be in your lower left and upper right. For me it's just the reverse. But that's where I have the line, or the diagonal line, of real darks running, and that will help to create that beautiful secondary design in the quilt, if that's what you're going to be putting together. And then make sure that when you place your half square triangle units within the row, make sure that you're placing them so that they are oriented correctly within the row. They are all a little bit different, so make sure you keep your eye on that. You can certainly sew this together just row by row if you choose to. I'm going to sew mine together in 4 patches. So I'm going to sew this patch, this 4-patch unit, that one, and that one. And so basically we have 9 4-patch units that I'm going to sew together to create this. And then once the 4-patch units have been sewn and squared up to 4.5 inches, then I'm going to web them together. I'll web these 2 rows together, and then I'll add the 3rd row. So I'm going to go ahead and do a 4-patch. I'll show you what the 4-patch units look like here on my tabletop in just a moment. So here we have the black. I've put mine together in 4-patch units, as you can see. And they each need to be squared up to 4.5 inches. Then make sure that they're laid out properly based upon the sketch or the diagram in the PDF. Make sure you pull that down, print it, save it, whatever you want to do there. Now I'm going to go ahead and web these together. I'm going to start with these 2 rows here, web these 2 rows together, then I'll web the last row with this, and then I'll sew the columns in this direction. Then I'm going to press it, square it up to 12.5 inches. I'll meet you back here. Here are 2 of the finished blacks, and these are the 4-patch square dance, and you can see the fun square dance that's happening in the center circle of the block here. I really love this block, and I think it turns out beautifully, especially when you're putting it together in a quilt layout just like this. It's a great way to use up charm squares, jelly rolls, 2.5-inch squares that you've already cut and that they're sitting in your scrap stash waiting to be used. So this is a great quilt. You'll notice in my quilts that I have an assortment of squares here. I have very springy looking squares. I have some Christmas themed squares. I have a number of things in my scrap stash, and I use it all, from batiks to calicos to quilted cottons, just all of it. It's just a lot of fun to put together some very bright, scrappy, and very happy looking quilts. Thank you so much for joining me for week number 42 of our 52-week series of Scrappy Blacks. Don't forget to check out the Quilt As You Go series that I'm putting together out on my YouTube channel with all of our Scrappy Blacks. If you're working with me and creating these Scrappy Blocks every week, you can actually put them together in a wonderful Quilt As You Go series. It's a very fun, fast, and easy way to quilt up your quilt. So check that out. I'll have that linked below. Don't forget to check out the YouTube video tutorial on my techniques. If you don't have your scrap stash all ready to go to use to make beautiful quilts, then this will help you. That tutorial will help you. And I've got that National Quilting Day tutorial where I'm actually going through and scrapping up my stash, and I can help you. There's lots of great hints and ideas in that video tutorial that will help you get your scrap stash cut up, sorted, and ready to go for a beautiful scrapping quilt. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you next time on my 52-week series of Scrappy Blacks and my Quilt As You Go series, and I have so much more coming up. So stay tuned. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification button so that you'll be notified when I do load more videos. Have a great week and happy quilting.